Some films were harmed in the making of this podcast. Hello and welcome back to For Your Consideration, the podcast featuring roundtable discussions reevaluating the cinematic canon of past masterpieces and modern classics. I'm Mike Josick.
And I'm Dustin Friesenand.
Thanks for joining us. This week on the show, we're actually going to pay off a joke that we sort of inadvertently set up in our first episode, where Dustin made a comment about Troll 2 being the greatest film of all time. I made a comment about, I think we covered that in episode 17, and let's just pull out the tape on that and hear how that conversation played out back in episode 1. The origin of the show goes back to a conversation I had with a coworker who was adamant that Pulp Fiction was most likely the greatest film ever made. This was something I disagreed with, and
as we all know, Troll 2 is the greatest film ever made.
We'll be covering that in episode 17.
Approximately.
Lo and behold, here we are in episode 17, so this week, if you haven't picked up on it yet, we're going to be covering the 1990 best-worst movie ever horror classic, Troll 2.
AKA the movie that does not feature trolls whatsoever, and it also doesn't feature werewolves wielding axes like the movie poster would have you believe.
So since we don't really have any below-the-line news or current events or commenter shoutouts that we need to do, we're going to jump straight into the film, so onwards to the credits. Troll 2 was directed by Drake Floyd,
AKA Claudio Fragasso.
Produced by Brenda Norris, Joe D'Amato, and Asher Zukolski-Larson. Screenplay was by Drake Floyd,
AKA his wife,
Rossella Drudy. The story was by Rossella Drudy and Drake Floyd. It starred Michael Stevenson, George Hardy, Margot Prey, Connie McFarland, Deborah Reed, Jason Wright, Darren Ewing, and Jason Stedman. Music was by Carlo Maria Cordio. Cinematography by Giancarlo Ferrando. It was edited by Vanya Friends. And it was released on October 12th, 1990. I believe its original release was not theatrical, but on HBO. Now, the movie is considered a B-horror comedy classic. It is considered the best worst movie ever. At one time, it was the number one worst film of all time on IMDb. I believe that status has changed.
It has changed. It also had a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, but that is up to 6%, I believe.
And that's due in part to, I think, the fact that this movie has really caught on as kind of like a midnight movie. They like to do the screenings and the fans come out, and it's our generation's Rocky Horror Picture Show, which we might do at some point in time, and I'm going to be far less kind to that one. Spoiler alert. I think Rocky Horror is on the list for some point in the future, but for now we're talking Troll 2, and I'll hand it off to you, Dustin. What did you think of this movie?
I am actually a fan of bad movies. The thing that I like to do with a lot of them is I like to look for the gems in them. They don't necessarily have the professional acting, the great special effects, maybe not the most skilled writers, but a lot of them always have something in them, as long as it was made with a bit of heart, some earnestness. You'll have, here's a scene which is fantastic. Here's a piece of acting which was great. Here was an idea that might not have been executed perfectly, but I really enjoy the idea. I like the concept. And I love looking at these movies for that kind of thing. My standards are obviously far lower. I'm not going to expect like multi-million-dollar special effects. But you can usually look beyond that to the gems underneath. And I think Troll 2 really does actually live up to a lot of that. It was made on a $100,000 budget, $200,000 budget. And it's not the worst movie of all time. I've seen way the hell worse. That is for sure. In every conceivable way. The Asylum makes nothing but movies that are worse than this, and they don't have redeemable qualities. But here, like watching the documentary, Claudio Fragasso, he believes in this movie. He's making this movie with everything he's got. He's put his heart and soul into this movie. And he's actually fairly upset that people don't enjoy it quite as much as he thinks that they should.
I think you're pretty much hitting the nail on the head when you talk about the movie being made with heart, because I've seen bigger budget films with better casts and better technical crews attached to them that were actually like worse movies. And even though this movie is kind of crazy, I think it does benefit from the fact that you go in knowing it's a low budget movie, it's a low budget horror movie, and your expectation is that little bit lower, but because they do so well with what they have, like we were talking earlier about the special effects, they don't overreach. They have a certain budget. They know that they don't have the budget to do the most amazing effects in the universe, but what they do with what they have is really quite remarkable. And yeah, like the acting isn't great.
Some of it's actually pretty stand up though. There's a few characters who are way over the top, but the dad, I thought he acted actually fairly well in it.
And in a weird way, because the movie sets up this world, you get the sense that everybody is not acting great. Everyone's kind of on the same level, with the exception of a few people who are a little bit sort of beyond that level. But you almost feel like this is how the world is. This is the universe that they live in. So once you sort of get used to that style, and once you get used to the ridiculousness of it, you start to just accept the weird leaps of logic. You just accept some of the strange dialogue and things happening and characters accepting things that they shouldn't accept, but they do because in a weird way it makes sense in the context of this film.
To the director and his wife who wrote it, like, this is almost an art film, so you even have that little bit of weirdness going on. You're watching something like Brazil and you know it's an art film and weird stuff happens, but you don't question it, and all of a sudden a movie like this comes along, weird stuff happens, and you do question it. That almost to an extent seems a bit of a double standard, where the director actually wanted to get something across. He wanted to convey to you this message, this meaning that was very important to him. So it's kind of odd in that sense that you have that standard.
That was one of the things that sort of interested me while researching this film, finding out that the director actually believed that there were like serious themes being addressed in here. Family was one, I think friendship was another, and my personal favorite, eating. These are all things he was commenting on that revolved around the human condition, I guess. And in his mind, this was a horror movie that had substance, that had something going on deeper than kind of just vegetarian goblins in the woods.
It's really hard to sell it with any sort of a little tagline, I think. Unless you're trying to sell a bad movie.
But to the movie's credit, like, I went into it knowing that this was the best, worst movie ever, and like...
When I found it because it was #1 worst movie of all time. That's when I was actively hunting these things out.
And like we said a little bit earlier, this movie, it actually plays out decently. It's not edited poorly, it's not even really directed poorly. There is actually some production value to the film. It doesn't look that bad. It has heart. It's very earnest and genuine, and they don't just go for the gross outs. This isn't one of those movies where they just spent all of their money on just trying to make like the wildest, wackiest creature effects or makeup effects. And
they also don't try to sell it with here's random tits. It's actually a PG-rated movie, and Claudio Fragasso is actually known for doing a lot of exploitation movies, so he even avoided that. I recently saw another one, Krampus, the Holiday Devil, and that one was utterly horrible. It was low budget, it was bad, but they even had a scene in there where for no reason, here's some chick with implants chained up in a cave for no reason. They didn't go for cheap crap like that, and it was something that was better. It was like that stuff would be below them. So that's certainly something you could say on the side of this worst movie ever, as people like to call it.
Something we're not below doing is taking a moment right now just to cut in and tell you to check us out on iTunes. If the podcast provider where you get your show from is the Apple iTunes Store, the best way to support FYC is to go there, rate and review the show. It only takes a second, it's easy to do, and it really helps us out. And if you leave us a comment, we will be sure to give you a shout out on one of the future shows. So we'd appreciate it if you took a minute to do that. And when I actually finished the movie the first time I saw it, I was kind of expecting a reaction that was along the lines of, I'm so glad that's done. Or at the very least, I'm so glad that's done, but I'm also kind of glad that I watched it. But in a weird way, I kind of felt like I was watching sort of a weird Tales from the Crypt kind of episode. It had that kind of tone, it had that kind of feel, and it's just, I mean, you compare a movie like this to something like Grizzly 2, and Grizzly 2 is just bad on so many levels, or Roger Corman's Fantastic Four, or what's that crazy...
I think that one's not even, like, super bad comparatively. Once again, that one was made with some heart.
What's that crazy movie that Bo Derek's husband made about the ghosts that are in love with Anthony Quinn?
Ghosts Can't Do It?
Ghosts Can't Do It. Like, that is a movie that is just painful. Absolutely painful. Whereas this, it's charming. It's genuinely charming.
It's a fun movie. It's not for everyone, however. I know a lot of people who they'd see a movie like this, they're like, this is stupid. And they just sort of walk out. They wouldn't be interested at all. It takes a certain kind of person. But you can actually say that about most kinds of movies. It takes a certain person to watch Brazil and appreciate it for what it is. It takes a certain kind of person to watch Gone with the Wind and appreciate it for what it is. It takes a certain person to watch Troll 2 and appreciate it for what it is.
I guess a good comparison would be like if you're looking at a sports fan the way you would look at a cinephile, where if you love movies, you don't just watch the good movies. You can actually find joy and entertainment and some sort of value in movies that aren't perfect. And it's kind of like, you know, I'm not a huge sports fan. I can sit down and I can watch playoffs because there's drama and there's emotion and there's all the stakes, and it's not like just one of 80 or 160 games in a season. But somebody who truly loves that sport is going to sit and watch like every game, and they're going to take things out of it, and they're going to follow the stats, and they're going to really care about it. So I don't know if that's a great analogy. I'm not the best at analogies.
I'll say.
Historically, I've been told that I'm terrible at analogies. But I kind of think that there is a comparison there. And, you know, Troll 2 is definitely a movie for someone who's interested in that type of cinema. It's definitely something I think a horror fan should maybe check out. It's the kind of movie for somebody who...
It's a movie I'd recommend to anybody who just likes to have a fun little movie. A movie that doesn't have to make you think, a movie that doesn't have to have certain points. Just something where you sit down and you enjoy an hour and a half without being too judgmental right off the huff.
And I like the fact you mentioned that this is basically a PG-rated movie. I don't know what the actual rating for the film is, but there's nothing in this beyond a PG. And I could happily give this to any of my kids. I mean, my youngest kid is 15. I could have probably given it to him several years earlier to watch, and he probably would get a kick out of it. And so many of the exploitation films, so many of the midnight movies, you kind of can't show to a kid. It doesn't have that sort of broad appeal to it. You'll
have something where it'll be, well, here's somebody getting hacked up with a chainsaw. It's going a little too far. Here's some unnecessary sex. That is too much. No, this movie is actually classy. I will actually say that. I will call this movie classy in that sense. That it doesn't go low. It doesn't go for the lowbrow shit. It doesn't go for the lowbrow stuff.
I probably wouldn't have gone there myself, but having heard you say it, I have to kind of agree that I think classy is a good way to... It's a good word to throw around.
And a lot of people might think that you can't compare apples to oranges, but at the end of the day, it's both fruit. Some might say you can't compare this to Gone with the Wind. You can't compare this to The Godfather. They're all movies, and you can compare them. So if we're talking about classics, a lot of people would say, well, this obviously is not a classic, or if it is a classic, it's a cult classic, and that's a different category. But what we're looking at with classics is this a movie that's going to live beyond itself? Is it something that you can watch 20 years down the road and get something out of? A lot of other movies that we're saying aren't, like, let's say Snow White, which is one of the movies we did not enjoy, or Sixth Sense. Watching it years later, we're like, this is not good.
I just got a shudder when you mentioned The Sixth Sense. That's how traumatized I am by the experience of that one.
There you go. Whereas last time I saw this was 10 years ago. I saw it again today, and I was amused again today. This is a movie that I think in 10 more years is still going to be fun when you watch it knowing what it is. And to an extent, doesn't that make it a classic?
We've talked before about how we bandy the word around classic, and we're using it as kind of a general term because what we're actually talking about is the lists. So because we're sort of tackling those lists, the whole point of the show is to challenge those lists and their definition of the greatest films of all time. So we've kind of shifted a little bit, at least I've kind of shifted a little bit to talk more masterpiece than classic. I've sort of switched into that, masterpiece or museum piece because we are talking about, does this deserve to be one of the greatest films of all time when we're picking away at whoever's list that we're picking away at?
Certainly as a masterpiece, this does not qualify. You're not going to look at it and point out all the great things they do and how it all blends together in a perfect form. But I could see it as a museum piece, as here's something that somebody took with what little they had and made something out of it that was still fun and enjoyable. To an extent, I could see it used as that. This is a movie that I would recommend to people. There's a lot of movies that are masterpieces I'd recommend to most anyone. This I'd recommend to certain people, for sure.
So in the final analysis, in your opinion, Troll 2 is a classic. It is a museum piece.
It is a film that I think will still hit a lot of points that it's hitting now, even if that's not where the director was aiming. It will still be an entertaining and fun movie 20 years down the road, which is more than I can say for some of the other ones that we've done.
I think I can get behind that argument. I think I was a little apprehensive to include this as a masterpiece, which is I think what I thought you were going to be going for.
It's not a masterpiece. It's not here's all the points are hitting beautifully. You know, it's not that.
When you were talking about including it on the list, that's sort of where I thought you were going, bringing it down to that classic / museum piece. Classification, that second tier that we have. I'm really comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with agreeing with you there and giving that a yay rather than an A as well.
Now for the hate mail to roll in, or the love mail, depending on whether or not you're one of the crazy Troll 2 fans.
Oddly enough, I don't think anybody would really disagree. I don't think the people listening are the AFI people.
Prove us wrong, AFI people.
So that brings another episode of FYC to a close. Thanks for sticking with us through this slightly off-center episode. Kind of felt like we needed to follow through on that joke, and I think we also just wanted to break up the kind of content a little bit. And as you may have noticed with some of our other shows, like the All Things Considered that was just released last week, and with the experiments that we've done with audio commentaries. Oh, speaking of audio commentaries, Dustin, maybe you want to talk about the little bonus that we have?
We are throwing up the audio commentary of Troll 2, which Mike has seen twice today because he wanted to make sure he went into it knowing what he was talking about. So we've both seen a documentary within the last day and the movie far too many times for our health. But hopefully it's something that could be enlightening or stir up some conversation.
So not only do you have this episode to listen to, but feel free to check out the audio commentary. I don't know, it's like a 94-minute movie or something. I think we throw out a little bit of trivia, information, personal thoughts. I think it's worth it, but that's for you to decide.
He's a little biased. I'm just going to inform you of this.
And be sure to check us out on Facebook and Twitter. We're at FYC Show on Twitter. We also have the WordPress page where we're putting up articles and original content in, I guess, virtual print. And we're on all the other social media. We have an email, fycshowmail@gmail.com. Feel free to send us anything through there. And with that, I think we're pretty much done, unless Dustin has anything he wants to add.
Not today.
All right, so that's a wrap. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time. I'm Mike.
And I'm Dustin.
Thanks for joining us.
Take care.
And you can't piss on hospitality. I won't allow it!